we had publicly funded elections at every level, then how many more Bernie Sanders that we would actually have? Hi, I'm Alison Hartson.
And I'm Roza Calderon.
Continuing to talk about really how we can get more people to vote and how we can get more progressives in office is also going to come down to policy, but it's kind of like a chicken and an egg thing, because the policies we need are going to be passed by progressives is my prediction. So we have to get the progressives in there, but we need those policies in order to get progressives in there. So it's, you know, we have a lot of work to do, but we do have ideas about what we need.
I personally believe in term limits. And the reason why I believe that is because there are Congress people, I think, that after their fourth term, you know, they are disconnected from the community. They no longer know what the problems here are. And beyond that, I truly feel that we do need fresh ideas. We do need people who are not the same group of people that create that, you know, that group mentality of we're right and they are wrong, and they is us. You know, so I feel that the longer these people stay in office, the more that they're susceptible to corruption, to covering up for one another, and to push policies that benefit those who continue to keep them in office through donating money.
The corruption doesn't just happen from the money that's given to them for their campaigns and the favors that are done in between elections. It's also done by how long you've been in there and how far removed you are from the people. I think that also plays into the class war that we're in as well, where it's, you know, continues to cost so much money to run for office that you have to be a millionaire or know millionaires, and usually only millionaires know millionaires in order to run for office.
I'm not sure of the exact number, but is it like 94% of the time the incumbent will get reelected?
It is.
It's something ridiculous.
Yeah, but in California for this election, it was 100%.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% in California. But here's the problem. You know, the reason why the House of Representatives, the terms were 2 years, and the Senate, the upper house, was 6 years, is because we need to get people in there that are different every single time. Otherwise, they would be lifelong appointments, just, you know, like judges. But that's essentially what we're doing by continuing to reelect the same people. There's Congress people who've been in there for 30 plus years, who have been there their entire lives. You know, they've made a career out of this. And by definition, the lower house, which is the House of Representatives, says that it's supposed to be a member of the community who represents the values and the concerns of the community, brings our worries and our concerns to Washington, and brings back solutions to our communities.
The whole idea that the U.S. House of Representatives is supposed to be closer to the people and therefore held more accountable also comes from being being voted in by us. Now U.S. senators are. That wasn't the way it originally was in our country. Right. But also they represent a smaller district. That's why, like in California, we have 53 congressional representatives and 2 U.S. senators, because the U.S. House is done by population, and so they should be able to be held more accountable, even though, you know, it's still a pretty large population they represent. But it's harder and harder to hold our representatives accountable when money constantly wins. Okay. And that's why we'll talk about some solutions around this. But that is by and large the problem. Term limits aren't in the Constitution for our congressional members, and it's a discussion to be had, you know, whether we should actually institute term limits. I've gone back and forth on whether I support term limits or not. I definitely, like probably everything in life, see the pros and cons to both, but I tend to lean towards term limits. Some people make the argument that the vote is the term limit. You vote people out if they're not doing their job. But the problem is when we actually don't have the power of our vote because of how much money ends up influencing elections and the propaganda around the candidates, it's really difficult to have that power, which is why, you know, we have to continue talking about ways to get around that.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think that the 2 years limit, and I think that just because it wasn't, you know, clearly written that said you can't do this 20 times, it doesn't mean that you should do it 20 times. And that's the way that people are interpreting it now. And that's just not the way it should go.
Some of the problems with term limits that we've seen here in California is the staff doesn't have term limits. So the staff usually ends up staying, and the legislators will move in and out. So it's the staff that really ends up running the show. They're the ones who really know the culture, they know the laws, they know the rules, etc. And they're just working circles around the candidate coming in there, like trying to figure out what's happening for the first time. And, you know, maybe that's a good thing because they need that guidance. But when you have a staffer who's been in there for 20, 30, 40 years and a full staff like that, and then candidates who come in and out, I see it in our own legislature lending to the same kinds of problems that we have in Congress where there aren't term limits. So, yeah, I struggle with that, but I do lean more towards term limits. I do.
Well, you know, I truly am a believer for term limits. I've seen some of the problems with staffers, but I have found on rare occasions, staffers that have been there for 30, 40 years. I have found some that have been there for 15, 16 years. So it is, I think it's like a young man's game when it comes to staffers.
What about then for the case to be made that if we had term limits, we might not have Bernie Sanders? Maybe we would, because of he's gone from like mayor to U.S. House to U.S. Senate. Maybe we do term limits in each one of those.
I think if you know there was term limits, we might have more Bernie Sanders. There might have been more people who have been able to come through with more ideas. He would have actually been able to get more done in 30 years because there would have been other people in there who had different views, who didn't become part of the Democratic establishment clique or the GOP establishment clique. And he wouldn't have been left alone sometimes with some of the great ideas that he has had. He would have had other people there with him. So I truly do believe that the more people that we are flushing through there, and if they're not working, you know, whether they worked or not, that they are moving along.
That's an interesting point, that we might have more Bernie Sanders given term limits. I am a huge proponent of publicly funded elections and compulsory publicly funded elections. And so if every candidate is running on that system, it forces candidates to really spend more time with their constituents. And I mean, I could talk for an hour about publicly funded elections, and maybe we can do like a whole nother segment on that another time. But I would be interested to see if we had publicly funded elections at every level, then how many more Bernie Sanders that we would actually have. How many more people who really come from our communities, really understand our communities, because they don't have to be millionaires. They don't have to know millionaires in order to run for office. And if that's the case, I think it would be interesting to see how much that affects what we're talking about, because maybe we wouldn't need term limits, because then we would have the option of keeping the really good people in there, because we can hold them more accountable with publicly funded elections. I also think publicly funded elections would get more people excited about voting. They would really feel like their vote counts, and the more people who vote, then, you know, the more accountable you can hold your legislator. And if you look at California, you know, we have term limits, but because we don't have publicly funded elections at the state and federal level, not in the way that we should, we don't have them at all at the state level. We technically have it at the federal level. Nobody uses it really. So because we don't have publicly funded elections, we have some of the most expensive races in the country here in California. And I'm not just speaking, like, obviously that's going to happen because the state is so huge, and the districts that our senators and our assembly people run in are comparable to congressional members. It's insane. But they're also just insanely expensive, which means we continue to have, you know, the upper class representing the working class here in the state. So the term limits haven't necessarily fixed it.
Yeah, and you know, 2/3 of all the funding that happens, all the donations that go into these elections, is coming from the top 1%. 2/3. The other third comes from average Americans or the upper class, you know, because to be honest with you, almost every person that I've spoken to that donated to my campaign, and we hit over 10,000 individual contributions. I would say 90% of them had never, ever donated to a campaign ever in their lives. They had no idea that that was a measure for how good a candidate could be. And the other thing with having public funded campaigns is that it would actually motivate voters because they would feel like they're a part of the system. They would say, oh, well, you know, nobody's knocked on my door, so I'm still holding on to my voucher and I'm not giving it to anybody until that person comes to my door and makes an impression on me based on their platform and their ideas, not how many endorsements they got, people who are already part of the problem are endorsing this candidate based on how much money they have instead of how much of a quality candidate they truly are. It would eliminate the whole problem with carpetbaggers because you'd actually have to know the community that you live in to knock on those doors and look at these people in the eye and talk to them about the issues that matter. And that's something that we are missing entirely from the system right now. I would love to have my little voucher and hold on to it for dear life until the right candidate came to my door.
I would add to that, and we need to fight like crazy for net neutrality so we can continue with independent news and being able to organize online like this and through cyberspace. And I don't know if you know about this, Roza, but there was a vote up in the assembly for a net neutrality bill, and it was totally gutted by the so-called progressives on this committee, who are all bought and sold by AT&T.
Yes. I actually had one of my followers on Twitter send me an email asking me how we can organize and knock on these doors when these guys are back in session. So the other thing is, you know, don't get discouraged. I know that Alison and I didn't make it through, and but there are other progressives who are running who need our help, and we can get there. You know, we have Maria Estrada who's running against Rendon. You know, he blocked SB 562 here in California. That is somebody that you can get behind, help them, work on their campaign. You know, the votes are not that far off to actually have a win in November. I could say a dozen of other people who are running in California who that is the same situation that they're in. When we can all get there, we can just join forces. And even if we get, you know, 10 seats just here in California at the state level or at the congressional level, we have won.
Plus, for every one of the good ones we get in, that's how many more people they inspire to run after them as well. I mean, that's correct. You know, the motivation and the inspiration that Bernie gave for so many people to be running this year. So that is another reason why these are so incredibly important. Some other things, some other policies that we really need include ranked choice voting. I'm actually a huge supporter of approval voting. Most people haven't heard of it. I won't go into it right now, but gives us a lot more options. It's proven to be a lot more democratic, and the way that people are elected in that way, instead of like first past the post, meaning whoever gets like the simple majority vote, then you end up having, through this research, it shows that the people, the voting populace is actually more satisfied with whoever ends up getting elected because of the way ranked choice or approval voting actually works. Mm-hmm. It's something that we could do another, like, whole other segment on ranked choice versus approval vote.
There are many policies we could implement in order to inspire more people to vote. They range from same-day registration to open primaries to moving voting days from Tuesdays to Saturdays or making it a holiday, increasing the number of polls in a community in order to decrease the lines at the voting polls, ending gerrymandering. What are some ideas that you have? What do you think about these policies? Let us know, comment in the video, or tweet at us.